The story of Chris Watts is one of the most disturbing and widely discussed true crime cases in recent history. At first glance, his life appeared ordinary. He was a husband, a father, and someone who, to many people, seemed quiet and reserved. He lived with his wife, Shannon Watts, and their two daughters, Bella Watts and Celeste Watts, in a suburban neighborhood in Frederick, Colorado. From the outside, their family looked happy. They shared photos online, posted videos, and presented what seemed like a loving household. Shannon, in particular, was active on social media, often showing moments from their daily lives, birthdays, family outings, and small celebrations. But behind that image, there were problems that weren't visible to the public. Their marriage had begun to struggle. There were financial pressures, emotional distance, and growing tension between them. Over time, the relationship began to break down. While Shannon was trying to hold things together, Chris had started to withdraw. During this period, Chris began an affair with a co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. This relationship marked a major turning point. He started imagining a different life, one without the responsibilities he already had. Instead of confronting his situation honestly or choosing separation, he allowed his thoughts to grow darker. By August 2018, everything reached a breaking point. On the night of August 12th and into the early hours of August 13th, Shannon returned home from a work trip. What happened next would become the center of one of the most shocking criminal cases in the United States. Chris later admitted that he killed Shannon inside their home. After that, he murdered his two young daughters. The details of these acts are deeply disturbing, not only because of what happened, but because of who committed them: a father, someone who was supposed to protect his children. In the hours that followed, he attempted to cover up the crime. He transported the bodies to an oil site where he worked, operated by Anadarko Petroleum. There, he hid Shannon's body in a shallow grave and disposed of his daughters in oil tanks. Later that same day, he tried to behave as though nothing had happened. He contacted friends and spoke with neighbors, pretending that his family was missing. When Shannon's friend became concerned and contacted authorities, the situation quickly escalated. Law enforcement officers arrived at the house. Chris spoke with them and even gave a televised interview, asking for his family's safe return. In that interview, he appeared calm, but many viewers later said something felt off: his body language, his tone, and the way he spoke. As the investigation progressed, suspicion began to focus on him. Security footage from a neighbor's home showed Chris loading items into his truck on the.
New video obtained from the Weld County District Attorney's Office shows the moments after Chris Watts murdered his pregnant wife and two young daughters. It comes from a neighbor's security camera. Take a look in the top left corner of your screen. It shows Watts walk out of his home in Frederick, then backs his truck up in the driveway, parking it so a portion of the bed is in the garage. It also shows Watts walking around his truck and putting items inside, including a red gasoline can. Then Watts drives away from his home. Weld County District Attorney Michael Tork told CBS Denver the truck was used to transport Shannon Watts and her daughters to the property of an oil and gas company where he left them. Watts was sentenced to life in prison without parole after pleading guilty. Curtis Silva covering Colorado First.
People struggled to understand how someone who appeared so normal could commit such acts. It raised questions about hidden lives, the pressures within relationships, and the danger of unresolved emotional conflict. One of the most unsettling aspects of the case is how ordinary everything seemed before the crimes. There were no obvious warning signs visible to outsiders that something so extreme was about to happen. Friends and neighbors described the family as normal. Shannon was seen as devoted and caring. The children were loved. And yet, behind closed doors, a completely different reality was unfolding. This case also highlights the importance of communication and confronting problems directly. Instead of addressing his unhappiness or seeking help, Chris avoided conflict. He withdrew emotionally and built a separate life in secret. Over time, that avoidance turned into something far more dangerous. It's also a reminder that appearances can be misleading. Social media often shows only the best moments of people's lives. It doesn't capture the struggles, the arguments, or the emotional distance that may exist behind the scenes. In this case, the contrast between what was shown publicly and what was actually happening privately was extreme. The story of Chris Watts is not just about crime. It's about the consequences of silence, deception, and unresolved issues. It's about how ignoring problems doesn't make them disappear. It can allow them to grow in ways that are destructive. Many people, the case remains difficult to process. There's a natural desire to understand why it happened, but some actions defy simple explanations. What can be taken from it, however, are the warning signs and lessons about honesty, responsibility, and seeking help when situations become overwhelming. No matter how difficult a situation may feel, there are always alternatives to violence. There are ways to leave, to start over, to ask for help, and to face reality without harming others. Those choices weren't made in this case, and the consequences were irreversible. After the sentencing of Chris Watts, many people assumed the case was over. But in reality, it continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Months after he was sent to prison, Chris agreed to provide a more detailed account of what happened. In early 2019, investigators traveled to interview him again, hoping to understand the full sequence of events and his mindset at the time. During this interview, he gave a much more disturbing and detailed confession. He described how the murders happened, step by step, and how he transported his family to the oil site. These revelations shocked even experienced investigators because of how calculated and emotionless parts of the account seemed. One of the most difficult aspects for people to understand was his behavior after the crimes. He didn't immediately show signs of panic or remorse in the way many would expect. Instead, he attempted to continue his routine, communicating with coworkers and even speaking publicly as if nothing had happened. This raised deeper questions. This denial, it an attempt to control the narrative? Or was it something more complex about his personality? Experts in psychology began analyzing the case. While no explanation can justify what happened, some pointed to patterns of emotional suppression, avoidance of conflict, and a tendency to present a calm exterior while internal pressures built up over time. Another important aspect of the case is how quickly suspicion shifted toward him. At first, it was treated as a missing persons case, but small inconsistencies in his story began to stand out. His lack of urgency, the gaps in his explanations, and the evidence captured on surveillance all contributed to the growing doubt. The neighbor's security footage became a key moment. It showed Chris backing his truck into the driveway and loading items early in the morning. While not proof on its own, it contradicted parts of his statements and gave investigators a clearer timeline. The polygraph test was another turning point. When he failed, it increased the pressure on him during questioning. Eventually, that pressure led to his initial confession, which later changed as more facts came to light. The case also brought attention to the role of digital evidence. Phone records, text messages, and online activity helped investigators piece together his relationship with Nicole Kessinger and understand the timeline leading up to the crime. This digital trail showed how his behavior had changed in the weeks before the murders. It revealed a growing emotional distance from his family and increasing focus on his new relationship. These patterns helped establish motive, even if they couldn't fully explain his actions. Public reaction to the case was intense. Many people followed every update, trying to make sense of what had happened. Social media discussions, Documentaries and analysis videos explored every detail, from body language to psychological theories. The case became a subject of widespread discussion, not just because of the crime itself, but because of how unexpected it seemed. It challenged the idea that danger always comes with obvious warning signs. In reality, some of the most serious situations develop quietly, without clear signals to those on the outside. Another layer of the story involves how people close to the family responded. Friends of Shannon Watts spoke about her efforts to keep the family together and the stress she had been experiencing. They described her as someone who was trying to make things work, even when the relationship was becoming strained. This contrast made the outcome even more difficult to accept. On one side, there was someone trying to hold the family together. On the other, someone who had already mentally checked out and was living a double life. Over time, the case has continued to be studied. Because people want to relive the tragedy, but because they want to understand how something like this can happen and how it might be prevented in the future. It has become an example used in discussions about relationships, communication, and mental health. It also raises questions about how people deal with pressure. When problems are ignored instead of addressed, they don't disappear. They build up, often in ways that aren't visible until it's too late. The story remains a powerful reminder that actions have consequences, not just for the person who commits them, but for everyone connected to the situation, families, friends, and entire communities. In this case, those consequences were permanent. If you're learning something from this series, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part. Share your thoughts below. What stands out to you the most about this case?